Hello, and thank you for being here at Infidelity Tales Lab. Your presence makes sharing these stories worthwhile. Tell us, where are you tuning in from today? Big city? Small town? Share with us in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Invisible Man. Nolan Riviera stared at the email from his wife's travel agency, confirming their upcoming trip to Chile. After 12 years of marriage to Vanessa, he still found himself surprised by her sudden enthusiasms. This trip had materialized out of nowhere 3 weeks ago. "It's time you met my parents properly," she'd announced over dinner at their Minneapolis home. "Mom and Dad have been in Santiago for 5 years now, and you've only met them twice at weddings. They want to show us around." Nolan ran his fingers through his salt and pepper hair, pushing away memories of those brief, uncomfortable meetings with the Aldridges. Vanessa's parents had always regarded him with thinly veiled disappointment. He was just a high school Spanish teacher who happened to have spent his childhood in various South American countries as the son of humanitarian workers, not the high-flying executive they'd hoped would claim their daughter's hand. "My Spanish is pretty rusty," he said, knowing it was a lie. His fluency was one of the few things about him that had ever impressed his in-laws. "That's exactly why we need you there," Vanessa countered, her hazel eyes lighting up in that way that still weakened his knees. "Dad's Spanish is terrible, and Mom refuses to learn more than please and thank you. You'll be our translator." Now, as Nolan packed his suitcase, he noticed that Vanessa had been unusually secretive about the itinerary. Her normally meticulous planning had been replaced with vague references to special surprises, and "you'll see when we get there." In their bedroom, Vanessa was on her third outfit change. At 42, she remained striking, tall, athletic, with honey blonde hair she maintained religiously. Lately, Nolan had noticed she'd been spending more time at the gym, buying new clothes, and taking mysterious calls that ended when he entered the room. "Do you think I should pack the blue dress or the black one?" she asked, holding both against her body. "The blue brings out your eyes," Nolan replied, studying her reflection in the mirror. For a moment, their eyes met, and he thought he detected something unfamiliar. Guilt? Anxiety? Before she quickly looked away. "Blue it is," she said brightly. "Trey always said blue was my color." "Trey?" Nolan frowned. "Who's Trey?" Vanessa's hands froze momentarily as she folded the dress. "Oh, just an old friend from college who became a fashion designer. I ran into him at the charity gala last month." Nolan nodded slowly, adding this to his mental collection of unexplained details. The charity gala she'd attended alone because he had parent-teacher conferences. The same night, she'd returned home at 2 a.m., claiming the after-party had run late. His phone buzzed with a text from Brooke, his 22-year-old daughter from his brief first marriage. She lived in California pursuing a photography career and remained the one uncomplicated joy in his life. "Have an amazing time in Chile, Dad. Send pics of the Andes. Love you." He smiled, texting back, "Will do, honey. Love you too." As they boarded the plane the next day, Nolan couldn't shake the feeling that this trip represented some kind of turning point. He just didn't know which way things would turn. Santiago welcomed them with perfect early summer weather. Theodore and Patricia Aldridge met them at the airport, Theodore's firm handshake and Patricia's air-kiss greeting carrying the same emotional temperature, as always, cool but correct. "Nolan, good to see you again," Theodore said with the practiced smile of a man who had spent 40 years in corporate lobbying. "Your Spanish will be invaluable. The locals speak so damned fast." "Happy to help," Nolan replied, noticing how Vanessa seemed unusually tense as they loaded luggage into the waiting SUV. Their first 3 days in Chile passed in a blur of tourist activities. Nolan seamlessly translated as they visited vineyards, historical sites, and restaurants. Yet he couldn't help noticing the frequency of Patricia's texts and calls, or how often Vanessa disappeared for quick chats with her mother. On their 4th morning, Theodore announced they'd be relocating to a luxury resort in the Colchagua Valley wine region. "A special treat," he explained. "One of the finest resorts in South America." During the 2-hour drive, Nolan caught Vanessa checking her phone repeatedly, typing rapid responses with a tight smile on her face. "Everything okay?" he asked quietly. Perfect, she replied, her voice an octave too high. Just excited about the resort. When they arrived at the imposing gates of Vina Hermosa Resort, Nolan found himself assigned the task of handling check-in while the others waited with the luggage. The elegant Chilean woman at reception greeted him warmly in Spanish. Welcome to Vina Hermosa, senor. How may I help you? Checking in for Aldridge, Nolan replied in fluent Spanish. For guests. The woman's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly as she consulted her computer. Aldridge, yes, I have the reservation here, but it shows 3 guests, not 4. Let me double check. Nolan felt a chill run through him. There must be a mistake. It's myself, my wife, and her parents. As the receptionist made a call to clarify, Nolan turned to see Vanessa approaching with a strange expression on her face. Behind her stood her parents and a tall, tan man with confident posture and expensive-looking casual clothes. Something about his walk, the proprietary way he stood near Vanessa, sent warning signals flaring through Nolan's mind. Any problem, honey? Vanessa asked, not quite meeting his eyes. There seems to be some confusion about the number of guests. Nolan explained, switching to English. They only have 3 registered. A peculiar silence fell over the group. Then, astonishingly, Patricia Aldridge laughed. It was a sharp, brittle sound. Well, I suppose your job's done already, she said, translating the first hiccup of our stay. Vanessa stepped forward, finally meeting Nolan's gaze. Nolan, this is Trey Westbrook. He'll be joining us for the remainder of the trip. The tall man extended his hand, a perfect white smile flashing beneath cold blue eyes. Good to finally meet you, Nolan. I've heard so much about you. Before Nolan could respond, Theodore cleared his throat. Should we clarify the room situation, Vanessa? Nolan watched his wife of 12 years take a deep breath. Nolan, we need to talk. But first, yes, the reservation is correct. 3 rooms. I don't understand, Nolan said, though the sickening truth was becoming clear. Patricia's smile was predatory. Your job as translator is finished, Nolan. We never booked you a room anyway. What the hell is going on? Nolan demanded, his voice dangerously quiet. Vanessa straightened her shoulders. Trey and I have been seeing each other for over a year. My parents have known him for decades. His father and dad worked together. I brought you here because I thought a clean break would be best. Away from our house, our routine. A clean break, Nolan repeated numbly. You brought me 5,000 miles to dump me in front of your parents and him? Trey stepped forward, placing a possessive hand on Vanessa's waist. Thanks for your service as the family translator. I'll take care of them from here. My Spanish is actually quite good. As if to demonstrate, he turned to the horrified receptionist and smoothly requested, in perfect Spanish, that she process the correct reservation for 3 rooms. Nolan looked from face to face. Vanessa's guilty but determined expression, her parents' barely concealed satisfaction, and Trey's smug confidence. 12 years of marriage reduced to a cruel public dismissal. Without a word, he set down the bags he'd been carrying, turned, and walked toward the resort entrance. Behind him, he heard Vanessa call his name once, hesitantly, but he didn't look back. Outside in the brilliant Chilean sunshine, surrounded by breathtaking vineyard vistas, Nolan Riviera felt his entire life crumbling into dust. But somewhere beneath the shock and humiliation, a hardened core of anger began to crystallize. Chapter 2: Ashes and Embers. The taxi dropped Nolan at a modest hotel in Santa Cruz, the nearest town to the luxury resort. He paid the driver mechanically, his mind still replaying the scene from 2 hours earlier. The receptionist had watched the entire drama unfold with wide eyes, occasionally whispering in Spanish to a colleague. Nolan hadn't missed her words. Que humiliation. Pobre hombre. What humiliation. Poor man. Inside his basic but clean room, Nolan sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed himself to feel the full impact of what had happened. 12 years of marriage. The countless parent-teacher nights Vanessa had skipped because she was too tired. The business trips that had grown more frequent in the past year. All the signs had been there, but he'd chosen not to see them. His phone buzzed. Vanessa, we need to talk. Where are you staying? He stared at the message for a long moment before replying. Why would you care? Three dots appeared, disappeared, then reappeared. I know you're angry. I handled this badly. But we need to discuss practical matters. Flights home. The house. Nolan laughed bitterly. She'd ambushed him with a divorce in a foreign country, humiliated him in front of her lover and parents, and now wanted to discuss practical matters. I'll make my own arrangements, he wrote back, then silenced his phone. For hours, he sat motionless as the room darkened around him. When hunger finally drove him out, he found a small restaurant where the waitress took one look at his face and silently brought him a double pisco sour before he'd even ordered food. Mal dia, she asked sympathetically. Bad day. El peor. The worst. She nodded sagely. Food first, then more drinks, senor. This is the Chilean way to handle bad days. As he picked at his meal, Nolan's phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. He almost ignored it until he saw it was written in Spanish. Senor Riviera, my name is Carmen Fuentes. I was the receptionist at Vina Hermosa today. What they did to you is cruel. If you need any assistance while in our country, please let me know. Nolan stared at the message, surprised by this unexpected kindness. He typed back a simple thanks, wondering how she'd obtained his number until he remembered he'd given it during the check-in process. Just as he was preparing to pay his bill, another message arrived from Carmen. There's something you should know. Your wife's friend made a special request when confirming the reservation last week. He asked for the honeymoon suite for himself and Senora Riviera. Nolan's hand froze above his wallet. The honeymoon suite. Last week, while he'd been grading final exams and Vanessa had been preparing for their special trip, he thanked Carmen again, left cash for his meal, and walked out into the warm evening air. The small town's main square was filled with locals enjoying the summer night. Families with laughing children, couples holding hands, groups of friends sharing bottles of wine. Normal lives untouched by betrayal. Nolan found himself drifting toward a bar at the edge of the square, where he ordered another pisco sour and took it to a corner table. His mind was beginning to move past shock into something more focused, more dangerous. This hadn't been a spontaneous decision. Vanessa, Trey, and her parents had planned this entire scenario. They'd brought him to Chile as a convenient translator, intending all along to discard him once he'd served his purpose. The calculated cruelty of it ignited something primal within him. His phone buzzed again. Theodore Aldrich this time. Nolan, I've arranged for your flight home tomorrow. The details are attached. Vanessa will contact you about the divorce proceedings once you're both back in Minneapolis. Attached was a coach ticket on a different airline from their original return flight, routing him through 3 cities and adding 8 hours to the journey. A final humiliation, Nolan thought, deleting the message without responding. As he sipped his drink, fragments of memories surfaced. Overhearing Patricia telling a friend at a family gathering, yes, Vanessa's husband is adequate. A teacher, you know, but she seems content enough. Theodore's persistent questions about Nolan's career advancement plans, as if teaching Spanish to high school students was merely a stepping stone to something Theodore would consider a real job. And Vanessa, how many times had she jokingly said things like, if you'd gone into international business instead of teaching, we could afford a vacation home by now, or my father could have set you up with something more substantial than teaching, you know? Nolan had always laughed it off, secure in his passion for education. But now he recognized the pattern of subtle belittlement, the constant implication that he wasn't quite good enough. As midnight approached, Nolan made a decision. He wouldn't be flying home tomorrow. Theodore's arrangements could go to hell. Instead, he pulled out his phone and made a call to an old friend he hadn't spoken to in years. Diego, it's Nolan Riviera. I know it's late, but I need a favor. Diego Sandoval had been Nolan's roommate during the year he'd spent teaching in Santiago before returning to the States. They'd lost touch after Nolan's marriage, another relationship Vanessa had subtly discouraged. Nolan, que sorpresa. Diego's warm voice brought the first genuine smile to Nolan's face in hours. Are you in Chile? I am, and I'm in trouble. 20 minutes later, Diego's Jeep pulled up outside the bar. The burly Chilean jumped out and embraced Nolan like a brother. So, my friend, Diego said as they drove towards Santiago, tell me about this woman who was stupid enough to throw away a good man. Nolan recounted the day's events, his voice growing steadier as he spoke. Diego listened without interrupting, occasionally shaking his head or muttering curses. You will stay with me, he declared when Nolan finished, for as long as you need, and then we will decide how to proceed. Proceed with what? Nolan asked. Diego shot him a sidelong glance. With making them regret what they did to you, of course. For the first time since walking out of the resort, Nolan felt a flicker of something beyond pain and humiliation, something that felt dangerously like purpose. I'm not sure I'm the vengeful type, he said slowly. Diego shrugged. Everyone is the vengeful type when betrayed deeply enough. The question is not whether to respond, but how. With intelligence, not just emotion. As they drove through the night towards Santiago, Nolan gazed out at the moonlit vineyards and thought about Diego's words. Intelligence, not just emotion. The teacher in him appreciated the distinction. By the time they reached Diego's apartment in an upscale Santiago neighborhood, Nolan had made another decision. He wouldn't just disappear, as Vanessa and her family clearly expected. He would make this easy for them. I need to send some emails, he told Diego after they'd settled in, and make some calls tomorrow. Of course, Diego replied, watching his friend with knowing eyes. My home is your home, and my resources are your resources. Resources? Nolan raised an eyebrow. Diego smiled. I may have neglected to mention my current occupation when we spoke. I run a security consulting firm now. Computer security, physical security, information gathering. Information gathering? Some might call it private investigation. Diego's smile widened. Corporations hire us to vet potential partners or investigate competitors. But the skills are transferable. Nolan considered this new information. I'm not sure what I'm planning yet. You don't need to be sure, Diego replied, placing a hand on Nolan's shoulder. You just need to be ready when the time comes. Rest now. Tomorrow we begin. As Nolan lay on Diego's guest bed, staring at the ceiling, he realized something surprising. Beneath the pain and anger, he felt more alive than he had in years. Vanessa's betrayal had shattered his life, but perhaps in those broken pieces lay an opportunity to rebuild something stronger, and to ensure that those who had so casually discarded him would come to regret their cruelty. His last thought before drifting into exhausted sleep was of Trey Westbrook's smug face as he'd said, "Thanks for your service." The memory no longer brought humiliation, only a cold, clear resolve. Chapter 3. Gathering Storm. Diego's spacious apartment occupied the top floor of a renovated colonial building in Santiago's Trinity Lasteria neighborhood. Nolan woke to the smell of strong coffee and the sound of his friend speaking rapid Spanish on the phone. Sí, necesito toda la información disponible. Es urgent. Gracias, te debo una. When Nolan emerged from the guest room, Diego ended his call and grinned. Good morning, my friend. There's coffee, bread, and fruit. How did you sleep? Better than expected, Nolan admitted, accepting a steaming mug. Who were you talking to? An old colleague who now works at the Ministry of Tourism. She has access to certain databases, hotel reservations, travel records. Diego shrugged, as if this were perfectly normal. I thought we might want to know more about your wife's activities. Nolan hesitated. Is that legal? Diego's laugh was genuine, but held an edge. Let's say it's in a gray area. But after what they did to you, do you really care about strictly following rules? The question hung in the air as Nolan sipped his coffee. Did he care? 24 hours ago, he would have said yes without hesitation. Nolan Riviera, dedicated teacher, law-abiding citizen, patient husband. But that man had been left behind at Vina Hermosa Resort. What exactly are you proposing? He asked finally. Diego sat across from him, suddenly serious. First, information. We learn everything we can about your wife, her lover, and her parents. Their movements, their plans, their vulnerabilities. Then, once we know what we're dealing with, we decide on action. I'm not interested in physical violence, Nolan clarified. Of course not, Diego agreed too quickly. There are many ways to make people suffer without laying a finger on them. Nolan considered his options. He could return to Minneapolis, hire a divorce lawyer, and go through the motions of civilized separation. Exactly what Vanessa was expecting. Or he could take a different path, one that would remind them all that the mild-mannered Spanish teacher they'd so carelessly discarded was not as predictable as they thought. Okay, he said finally. Let's start with information. Diego grinned and pulled out his laptop. First, let's look at your finances. You need to protect yourself. Nolan spent the morning securing his modest savings and checking accounts, changing passwords on everything from his email to his credit cards. Vanessa had her own accounts, but they shared several joint ones for household expenses. He moved his next paycheck's direct deposit to his private account. Good, Diego approved. Now, she cannot drain your resources while you're away. Next, Nolan called the school principal, explaining that a family emergency would keep him in Chile longer than planned. With summer breaks starting in a week, it was a minor inconvenience easily covered by a substitute. By afternoon, Diego's contacts began reporting back. The picture that emerged was both illuminating and infuriating. Trey Westbrook was not just an old friend from college, as Vanessa had claimed. He was the son of Theodore Aldridge's former business partner and had known the family since childhood. After a successful career in finance, he'd started a venture capital firm 5 years ago. Around the same time, the Aldridges relocated to Chile. Look at this, Diego said, pointing to his screen. Your in-laws have invested heavily in Westbrook's fund. Almost $2 million. More damning were the travel records. Vanessa had made 3 trips to Chile in the past year, only one of which she'd told Nolan about. The other 2 had been disguised as business conferences in Chicago and Denver. She's been carrying on this affair for at least a year, Diego confirmed. Probably longer. By evening, Nolan's shock had hardened into cold determination. I want to know what they're doing now, he said. Today, tomorrow, their plans for the rest of the trip. Diego made another call, speaking in low, urgent Spanish. When he hung up, he looked troubled. My contact at Vina Hermosa says they're celebrating. They've booked a private dinner tonight in one of the vineyard pavilions. Apparently, it's an engagement celebration. Engagement. Nolan felt like he'd been punched. We're not even divorced. In their minds, that's a mere technicality, Diego observed. They're already planning the next chapter. Something broke inside Nolan then. The last remnant of the accommodating, forgiving man he'd been. I want to see it, he said, his voice eerily calm. I want to see them celebrating my replacement. Diego studied him carefully. Are you sure? It will be painful. I'm sure. I need to see exactly what I'm dealing with. 3 hours later, they were parked on a hillside overlooking Vina Hermosa Resort. Through high-powered binoculars, standard equipment for security assessments, Diego explained. Nolan watched the intimate gathering in a glass-walled pavilion nestled among the vines. Vanessa wore the blue dress he'd complimented just days ago. She was radiant, laughing as Trey opened a champagne bottle. Theodore and Patricia beamed with approval that Nolan had never seen directed at him. 2 other couples Nolan didn't recognize completed the party. Who are they? He wondered aloud. Diego consulted his phone. According to my contact, they're local business associates of Westbrook's. Potential investors. As Nolan watched, Trey raised his glass in a toast. Even from this distance, the body language was clear. This was a man celebrating a victory, not just a relationship. Then Vanessa stood and clinked her glass for attention. Though Nolan couldn't hear her words, her gestures told the story. She touched her stomach meaningfully, and the group erupted in congratulatory embraces. Is she saying? Nolan couldn't finish the sentence. Diego's face darkened. It appears your replacement is complete in every way. She's announcing a pregnancy. The binoculars trembled in Nolan's hands. A baby. His wife of 12 years, who had always deferred having children with him because the timing wasn't right, was now proudly announcing her pregnancy by another man. They've been planning this for months, he said woodenly. She must be at least through the first trimester to be announcing it. Diego took the binoculars gently from Nolan's shaking hands. Now you see the full picture. The question is, what will you do with this knowledge? On the drive back to Santiago, Nolan was silent, processing everything he'd witnessed. The casual cruelty, the complete erasure of 12 years together, the celebration of his replacement, not just as a husband, but potentially as a father. By the time they reached Diego's apartment, Nolan had made his decision. I need your help, he told Diego. Not just with information now. I need to make them pay, all of them. Not with violence, but with something that will hurt them far more. Diego nodded, unsurprised. What do you have in mind? First, I need to know everything about Westbrook's business. His investors, his ventures, his vulnerabilities. Nolan's voice was steady now. And I need to understand exactly what Theodore Aldridge's role is in all this. That can be arranged, Diego said, but it will take time and resources. Nolan looked his friend in the eye. I have nothing but time now, and whatever resources I have are at your disposal. Diego smiled, a predatory expression that revealed another side of the jovial Chilean. Then let us begin planning in earnest. But first, one question. How far are you willing to go? There are lines that, once crossed, cannot be uncrossed. Nolan thought of Vanessa's hand on her stomach, of Trey's triumphant smile, of the Aldridge's satisfied expressions. They crossed the line first, he said quietly. Now they'll learn what happens when you mistake patience for weakness and kindness for vulnerability. Diego nodded, recognizing the transformation in his friend. Very well. Tomorrow, we start building your revenge. Tonight, you should call your daughter. She should hear about the separation from you, not from her mother. Nolan nodded, grateful for the reminder about Brooke. At least in this one thing, he would do what Vanessa had not, handle a difficult truth with honesty and respect. As he dialed Brooke's number, Nolan felt a strange calm settling over him. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, it was truly his to shape. And he would shape it into something that Vanessa, Trey, and the Aldridges would never forget. Chapter 4, New Foundations. 2 weeks after the humiliation at Vina Hermosa, Nolan sat in the sleek conference room of Sandoval Security Solutions, Diego's surprisingly substantial business operation. The office occupied a full floor in a modern high-rise overlooking Santiago's financial district, a far cry from the struggling English language school where they'd met 15 years earlier. Your friend has done well for himself, remarked Brooke Riviera, sitting beside her father. She had flown to Chile immediately after hearing about Vanessa's betrayal, postponing a photography assignment to support him. At 22, Brooke was a striking blend of Nolan and her mother, Ashley, Nolan's college girlfriend and brief first wife. She had Ashley's artistic talent and Nolan's analytical mind, a combination that had made her a rising star in documentary photography. Diego always had hustle, Nolan agreed, watching his old friend direct a team meeting through the glass walls. I just didn't realize how much. Brooke squeezed his hand. I'm glad you have him in your corner. And I'm still processing the fact that Vanessa is pregnant with another man's child while still married to you. That's some telenovela-level drama. Nolan winced. The pregnancy revelation had been the hardest part to share with Brooke, who had maintained a cordial but distant relationship with her stepmother over the years. The timing suggests she's been unfaithful for at least 4 months, he said. Probably longer. Brooke's expression darkened. And they planned this whole elaborate betrayal, bringing you to Chile just to humiliate you. It's sociopathic. Before Nolan could respond, Diego entered, accompanied by a severe-looking woman in her 40s. Good morning. Brooke, it's wonderful to see you again after all these years, Diego exclaimed, embracing her warmly. This is Sofia Vega, our chief intelligence analyst. Sofia nodded curtly, placing a tablet on the conference table. We have the full picture now, Mr. Riviera. You might want to brace yourself. Over the next hour, Sofia methodically laid out the results of their investigation. Trey Westbrook's venture capital firm, Westbrook Innovations, had been struggling for the past 2 years, with several high-profile investments failing to deliver promised returns. Theodore Aldridge had invested not just his own money, but had brought in several former colleagues and friends. The fund needs a major success story to attract new investors, Sofia explained. That's where this comes in. She displayed documents showing Westbrook's latest venture, exclusive development rights for luxury resorts throughout Chile's wine regions. The Chilean government has been selectively approving foreign development in protected regions, Sofia continued. Westbrook secured rights to 5 prime locations, including an expansion of Vina Hermosa. Let me guess, Nolan said bitterly. Theodore Aldridge's connections made that possible. Sophia nodded. Exactly. His lobbying firm represents several Chilean industries in Washington. He leveraged those relationships to help Westbrook navigate Chilean bureaucracy. What does this have to do with Vanessa? Brooke asked. Sophia's expression revealed a hint of distaste. Your stepmother appears to be both a romantic inducement and a business asset. Her lifestyle blog has been gradually shifting toward luxury travel content, specifically featuring exclusive Chilean destinations. She displayed Vanessa's blog, Vanessa Voyages, which Nolan had always considered a harmless hobby. Recent posts prominently featured Chilean wines, resorts, and landscapes, all with professional photography and suspiciously specific investment information disguised as travel tips. She's being positioned as the public face of their venture, Sophia concluded. An influencer drawing wealthy American tourists and potential investors to their properties. Nolan stared at recent photos of Vanessa posing in various Chilean locations, her carefully curated image suddenly revealing its strategic purpose. How could he have been so blind? There's more, Diego interjected gently. The pregnancy announcement wasn't just personal. It's part of the narrative they're creating, the perfect power couple building a legacy together. Sophia nodded. They've already conducted interviews with luxury travel magazines, portraying themselves as visionaries creating exclusive experiences in untouched Chilean paradise. The final blow came with a document showing Nolan and Vanessa's Minneapolis home had been listed for sale 3 days ago, without Nolan's knowledge or consent. She can't legally sell it without my signature, Nolan protested. No, but she's already marketing it, Sophia replied. The listing agent is Trey Westbrook's sister. Silence fell over the room as Nolan absorbed everything. His marriage, his home, his dignity, all sacrificed for Vanessa's ambitions and her family's financial interests. Finally, Diego spoke. Now you know what you're facing. The question is, what do you want to do about it? Nolan looked at his daughter, then back at Diego and Sophia. I want to dismantle their entire plan. Not just for revenge, but because what they're doing feels wrong on multiple levels. Brooks squeezed his hand again. Dad, are you sure? You could just divorce Vanessa, take your share of the assets, and start over. Nolan shook his head. That's what they expect. For me to slink away, humiliated and defeated. But they use me, Brooke. Not just Vanessa, but all of them. They used my skills, my trust, and my love as tools for their advantage, then discarded me when they thought I'd served my purpose. His voice hardened. I want them to understand that I'm not just an inconvenient obstacle in their perfect plan. I'm the reckoning they never saw coming. Diego smiled slowly. Then let's get to work. Sophia will continue gathering intelligence. Meanwhile, we need to secure your legal position. He introduced Nolan to Mateo Diaz, a Chilean-American attorney specializing in international divorce and property law. Mateo's assessment was blunt but encouraging. Your wife has made serious tactical errors, he explained. By announcing her pregnancy while still legally married to you, she's compromised her negotiating position. In Minnesota, a child born during a marriage is legally presumed to be the husband's child. But it's not my child, Nolan objected. Of course, Mateo agreed. But legally, it creates complications she'll need to resolve through paternity testing and additional legal procedures. It gives us leverage. Over the following days, a strategy took shape. Instead of flying back to Minneapolis, as everyone expected, Nolan would remain in Chile, working remotely for the remainder of the school year. Diego arranged a short-term lease on a comfortable apartment near his office. Brooke reluctantly returned to California, but promised to visit frequently. I've already told Mom what's happening, she said before leaving. She sent her support and says, this is a direct quote, show that backstabbing barracuda what happens when she messes with a Riviera. Nolan laughed, remembering Ashley's fiery spirit. They had divorced amicably when they were barely in their 20s, recognizing they were too young and too different to make it work. But they'd remained respectful co-parents, something Vanessa had always seemed to resent. With Brooke gone, Nolan threw himself into what Diego had dubbed Operation Translator's Revenge. The first phase involved careful legal maneuvering. Through Mateo, Nolan filed for divorce in Minnesota, citing adultery and including detailed evidence of Vanessa's affair. Simultaneously, he filed an injunction preventing the sale of their home without court approval. He also registered a legal claim in Chile challenging Westbrook's development rights based on environmental regulations that Sofia had uncovered. The legal actions were designed not necessarily to succeed, but to create complications and delays. As Mateo explained, every day their projects are stalled cost them money and investor confidence. While the legal wheels turned, Nolan focused on another aspect of his plan. If Vanessa was positioning herself as an authentic voice of luxury Chilean experiences, he would become the authority on sustainable, authentic Chilean tourism. Drawing on his years teaching Spanish language and Latin American culture, Nolan launched a blog called The Authentic Chile, highlighting small, locally owned businesses, environmental preservation efforts, and cultural experiences that foreign developers often overlooked. To his surprise, the blog gained traction quickly, particularly after Brooke contributed stunning photo essays contrasting unspoiled Chilean landscapes with overdeveloped tourist areas. Several Chilean environmental organizations reached out, eager to share their concerns about foreign development in ecologically sensitive regions. 3 weeks into his new Chilean life, Nolan received his first direct communication from Vanessa since the confrontation at the resort. Her email was a curious blend of irritation and forced civility. "Nolan, I've been trying to reach you. Our lawyer says you filed for divorce citing adultery, which seems unnecessarily vindictive. I had hoped we could handle this amicably. Please contact our attorney to discuss a reasonable settlement. Also, I need you to sign the paperwork for the house sale. I've already purchased a new property and need the funds." No apology. No acknowledgement of her betrayal. Just irritation that he wasn't complying with her plans. Nolan showed the email to Mateo, who chuckled. "She's realizing that discarding you won't be as simple as she thought. How do you want to respond?" "I don't," Nolan decided. "Let her wonder. Let her worry." The following week brought evidence that his strategy was working. Sofia reported that Westbrook Innovations had postponed a major investor presentation, citing regulatory complications. Vanessa's blog, meanwhile, had published a passive-aggressive post about embracing new challenges and navigating unexpected obstacles with grace. "They're feeling the pressure," Diego observed with satisfaction. "But this is just the beginning. Are you ready for phase 2? Nolan nodded, a grim smile playing on his lips. "Absolutely. It's time they understand who they're really dealing with." As he walked home that evening through Santiago's vibrant streets, Nolan reflected on how dramatically his life had changed. The pain of Vanessa's betrayal remained, but it no longer defined him. In its place was a sense of purpose and, surprisingly, freedom. His phone buzzed with a text from Carmen Fuentes, the receptionist from Vina Hermosa, who had become an unexpected ally, occasionally feeding him information about Westbrook and the Aldridge's activities at the resort. "They return to Santiago tomorrow," her message read. "She doesn't look happy. Lots of tense conversations." Nolan smiled and typed back a thank you. The storm he had set in motion was gathering strength. Soon, it would break over them all. Chapter 5, Counterattack. "Mr. Riviera, I strongly advise against this meeting," Mateo warned, adjusting his tie nervously. "Legally speaking, direct confrontation could undermine our position." They were standing in the lobby of the Grand Santiago Hotel, where Theodore and Patricia Aldridge were hosting a reception for potential investors in Westbrook Innovations. Sofia's intelligence had confirmed that Vanessa and Trey would also be attending. "I appreciate your concern, Mateo," Nolan replied calmly. "But they don't get to hide from me while trying to sell off pieces of my life." He was barely recognizable from the broken man who had walked away from Vina Hermosa a month earlier. Gone was the casual American tourist. In his place stood a man in an impeccably tailored Chilean suit, his salt and pepper hairstyled in a more contemporary cut, his posture radiating quiet confidence. Diego approached, looking elegant in his own dark suit. "Everything is in place. Remember, The goal is strategic disruption, not emotional confrontation. Nolan nodded. I understand the difference now. They entered the hotel's grand ballroom, where about 50 well-dressed guests mingled amid displays showcasing Westbrook's planned luxury developments. Large photographs, many taken by Vanessa, depicted idyllic vineyard settings with architectural renderings of exclusive villas and resort facilities superimposed. Nolan spotted them immediately. Theodore and Patricia worked the room with practiced charm, while Trey engaged animatedly with a group of older men who fit the profile of potential investors. Vanessa stood slightly apart, absently touching her stomach, which now showed the first visible signs of pregnancy. There's our target, Diego murmured, nodding toward a distinguished-looking man in conversation with Trey. Ernesto Valdivia, Environment Minister, the one person who could single-handedly derail their permit applications. Following the plan, Diego approached Valdivia first, greeting him warmly as an old acquaintance. After a moment of conversation, he gestured toward Nolan, who moved smoothly to join them. Minister Valdivia, may I introduce Nolan Riviera? He's the environmental education specialist I mentioned. Ah, yes. The Authentic Chile blog, Valdivia said, shaking Nolan's hand enthusiastically. Your recent piece on vineyard development impact was most illuminating. From the corner of his eye, Nolan saw Trey freeze, then pale, as recognition dawned. Precisely the reaction they'd hoped for. Minister, I'd be happy to send you our complete environmental impact study. Trey interjected, trying to reclaim Valdivia's attention. The minister smiled politely. Of course, Mr. Westbrook. Though I must say, Mr. Riviera's grassroots perspective offers valuable counterpoints to developer analyses. As the conversation continued, Nolan maintained perfect composure, discussing Chilean environmental regulations with knowledgeable ease, while Trey grew increasingly agitated. When Vanessa finally noticed the interaction, her champagne glass nearly slipped from her fingers. Excuse me, Minister, Trey said abruptly. There's an urgent matter requiring my attention. He retreated to Vanessa's side, engaging in a tense whispered conversation while shooting glances at Nolan. Moments later, Theodore Aldridge joined them, his forced smile failing to mask his alarm. Phase 1 complete, Diego muttered. They're rattled. After Valdivia moved on to greet other guests, Nolan deliberately positioned himself near a display featuring Vanessa's photographs. He studied them with exaggerated interest until, inevitably, Theodore approached. What the hell are you doing here? His former father-in-law demanded in a harsh whisper. Nolan turned with mild surprise. Theodore, lovely event. I'm here as a guest of Minister Valdivia's office. They've taken quite an interest in sustainable tourism development. Theodore's face flushed deep red. This is inappropriate. You need to leave. Actually, I've been invited, Nolan replied pleasantly. Unlike at Vina Hermosa, where I was uninvited without my knowledge. Before Theodore could respond, Patricia and Vanessa appeared at his side, with Trey hovering anxiously nearby. Nolan, Vanessa said, her voice strained. We need to talk privately. Do we? Nolan raised an eyebrow. I believe your last communication indicated all discussions should go through lawyers. Patricia stepped forward, her social mask firmly in place despite the tension. This is hardly the venue for family disagreements. Please, let's be civilized. Civilized, Nolan repeated thoughtfully. Like plotting to replace your daughter's husband while using him as a translator? That kind of civilized. Trey moved closer, lowering his voice to a threatening whisper. You making a scene? Whatever game you're playing. Oh, I'm just getting started, Nolan interrupted pleasantly. By the way, congratulations on the baby, Vanessa. I understand you're about 16 weeks along. Interesting timing, considering you were still sharing my bed 5 months ago. Vanessa blanched. That's not. Minister Valdivia seemed very interested in my blog. Nolan continued conversationally. Particularly the upcoming series on foreign developers exploiting environmental loopholes. I believe your properties feature prominently, Trey. Trey's handsome face hardened. Are you threatening me? Not at all. Just engaging in the same transparent honesty you all showed me in Chile. Nolan's smile never wavered. Now, if you'll excuse me, I see someone I need to speak with. He walked away, feeling their stares burning into his back. Diego joined him moments later by the bar. That was masterfully done, his friend approved. Valdivia is intrigued by your environmental concerns, and I made sure he knows about your personal connection to the Westbrook project. How did they look after I left? Nolan asked, accepting a glass of Chilean red wine. Like people discovering their carefully constructed house is built on quicksand, Diego replied with satisfaction. Phase 2 is underway as we speak. Across the room, they watched as Trey was approached by a young Chilean woman who handed him a legal document. Mateo's assistant, right on schedule. Court order temporarily freezing development pending environmental review, Diego explained unnecessarily. Delivered during their investor reception for maximum impact. Trey's face contorted with rage as he scanned the document. He looked up, finding Nolan immediately in the crowd. For a moment, their eyes locked in mutual recognition. This was war now, declared openly. Nolan raised his glass in a mocking toast, then turned away. The fallout from the reception was immediate and far-reaching. By morning, financial blogs were reporting that Westbrook Innovations faced regulatory hurdles for their Chilean projects. By afternoon, several potential investors had publicly distanced themselves from the venture. In his Santiago apartment, Nolan fielded calls from journalists seeking comment on his environmental blog's sudden prominence in the development controversy. Following Sophia's media strategy, he positioned himself not as a vengeful ex-husband, but as an educator concerned about sustainable tourism. My personal connection to Westbrook Innovations through my soon-to-be ex-wife is unfortunate timing, he told the Santiago Economic Times. But my environmental concerns stand on their own merits. When a particularly persistent reporter from an American travel magazine pressed about the personal angle, Nolan simply said, "Sometimes life takes unexpected turns that open our eyes to larger issues. I came to Chile for personal reasons, but stayed because I found a cause worth fighting for." A week after the reception, Vanessa finally requested a face-to-face meeting. They met at a neutral location, a quiet cafe in Santiago's business district, with both Mateo and Vanessa's Chilean attorney present. Vanessa had clearly prepared carefully for the meeting, dressed in a conservative maternity dress that both acknowledged and weaponized her pregnancy. But Nolan noted with satisfaction that she couldn't quite hide the strain in her eyes or the tension in her shoulders. "Nolan," she began after awkward pleasantries, "this situation has spiraled out of control. I know you're hurt. Let's not pretend this is about hurt feelings," Nolan interrupted calmly. "This is about consequences for calculated actions." Vanessa's lawyer, a sleek woman named Claudia Moreno, interjected. "Mr. Riviera, my client is prepared to offer a generous divorce settlement if you'll withdraw your environmental complaints and cease your disruptive activities." Disruptive? Nolan raised an eyebrow. "I'm simply sharing factual information about development impact. If that disrupts Mr. Westbrook's plans, perhaps his plans deserve disruption." Vanessa leaned forward. "Be reasonable, Nolan. What do you want? Money? The house? Name your price." The question hung in the air as Nolan studied his wife of 12 years. The woman who had once been the center of his world now looked like a stranger, beautiful still, but hollow somehow. "I want you to understand something, Vanessa," he said finally. "You, your parents, and your lover didn't just end our marriage. You tried to erase me, to write me out of the story as a disposable character. That was your mistake." He stood, straightening his jacket. "There is no price. There is only accountability. I suggest you all prepare for it." As he and Mateo left the cafe, Nolan felt a strange mixture of emotions. Satisfaction at Vanessa's evident distress, but also a lingering sadness for the woman he'd once loved and the life they'd shared. "You held firm," Mateo approved as they walked to his car. "They're scrambling now. What's our next move?" Nolan asked. "They'll try to discredit you," Mateo predicted. "Attack your credibility, your motives. Sophia is already monitoring for hit pieces in the media." He wasn't wrong. The following day, a financial blog published an article questioning Nolan's environmental expertise and suggesting his activism was merely the vindictive campaign of a jilted husband. Similar stories appeared in quick succession, clearly orchestrated. But Sophia had anticipated this. Within hours, The Authentic Chile published a powerful photo essay by Brooke Riviera, documenting the environmental impact of similar luxury developments in California wine country. The accompanying text, written by Nolan, drew carefully researched parallels to the proposed Chilean projects. More surprisingly, 3 prominent Chilean environmental organizations issued statements supporting Nolan's concerns and calling for more rigorous review of foreign development projects. Diego's connections had proved invaluable once again. The counter-narrative was working. By week's end, Minister Valdivia announced an expanded environmental review process for all luxury developments in protected regions, a bureaucratic nightmare for Westbrook Innovation's timeline. They're bleeding investor confidence, Sophia reported during their daily strategy meeting. 2 major backers have withdrawn support pending resolution of the regulatory issues. Diego nodded with satisfaction. And Theodore Aldridge's lobbying firm has lost a key Chilean industrial client who feared association with the controversy. Nolan absorbed this news with mixed emotions. The strategic part of him, the part that had emerged from the ashes of his humiliation, felt vindicated. But another part questioned how far he was willing to go. Are we destroying the project or just delaying it? He asked. That depends on what you want, Diego replied frankly. We could push further. There are financial irregularities in Westbrook's Chilean operations that could interest authorities. Or we could use our current leverage to negotiate. Negotiate for what? Nolan wondered. That's the question you need to answer, Diego said gently. Revenge feels satisfying in the moment, but what do you truly want for your future? Before Nolan could respond, Sophia burst into the office, her normally composed expression shattered. We have a problem, she announced, placing her tablet on the table. Westbrook's team has discovered who's been feeding us inside information from Vina Hermosa. On the screen was a news article with the headline, Resort Employee Arrested for Corporate Espionage. Below, it was a photo of Carmen Fuentes being escorted from the resort by police. They're charging her with stealing confidential business information, Sophia explained grimly. She could face significant jail time. Nolan stood abruptly, his face pale. This is my fault. She was just trying to help after witnessing how they treated me. It's a tactical move, Diego assessed. They're sending a message about consequences while trying to cut off our intelligence. I don't care about the tactics, Nolan snapped. We need to help her. Now, as they scrambled to arrange legal representation for Carmen, Nolan's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Perhaps now you understand the real stakes of this game you've started. Back off, or others will suffer. This is your only warning. TW. Nolan showed the message to Diego and Sophia, his resolve hardening. What had begun as personal vengeance had evolved into something more complex. A battle with real casualties and escalating stakes. They've made a critical error, Diego said after a moment. They've given us evidence of witness intimidation and threatening behavior. Sophia nodded. We can use this, especially if we can prove Westbrook is behind Carmen's arrest. Nolan looked at Carmen's photo again, at her frightened expression as she was led away. This isn't just strategy anymore. It's about right and wrong. They're willing to destroy an innocent woman to protect their investments. He pocketed his phone, decision made. No more measured response. If they want all-out war, that's what they'll get. Chapter 6, Battlefield Promotion. Carmen Fuentes sat across from Nolan in the austere visitor's room of the Santiago Detention Center, her usual composed demeanor replaced by barely contained anxiety. 3 days after her arrest, the dark circles under her eyes testified to sleepless nights. I'm so sorry, Nolan said in Spanish, his voice low. This happened because you tried to help me. Carmen shook her head wearily. Don't blame yourself. I knew what I was doing. We've hired the best criminal defense attorney in Chile, Nolan assured her. And we're working on other angles. I promise you won't face this alone. After the guard escorted Carmen back to her cell, Nolan met Diego and Mateo outside the facility. How is she? Diego asked. Scared, but holding together, Nolan replied grimly. What's the latest? Mateo consulted his phone. The prosecutor is pushing for industrial espionage charges, claiming she accessed confidential business plans and investor information. Can they prove it? Nolan asked. That's where things get interesting, Diego interjected. The prosecutor's case references specific documents that Carmen allegedly accessed, documents we know she never sent us. Nolan frowned. So they're fabricating evidence? It appears so, Mateo confirmed, which gives us leverage, but only if we can prove it. As they walked to Diego's car, Nolan's phone rang. Brooke, Dad, have you seen the news? She asked without preamble, her voice tight with anger. Which news? Vanessa gave an interview to the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. You should just read it. I'm sending the link now. Moments later, Nolan was staring at the headline. Local teacher's environmental crusade masks personal vendetta, says estranged wife. The article painted Nolan as an unhinged, vengeful ex-husband using environmental activism as a smokescreen for sabotaging his wife's new relationship. Vanessa was quoted extensively, portraying herself as a victim of Nolan's obsessive behavior and inability to accept the end of their marriage. Most damaging was her claim that Nolan had always been possessive and controlling, suggesting a pattern of behavior rather than a response to betrayal. She's gaslighting you publicly, Brooke fumed over the phone, making it sound like their affair was some kind of escape from a bad marriage rather than a calculated betrayal. Nolan felt a familiar coldness settling in his chest. They're trying to undermine my credibility before we can help Carmen. What are you going to do? Brooke asked. Change the narrative, Nolan replied. On every front. Back at Diego's office, they formulated a multi-pronged response. First, they accelerated plans to expose the financial irregularities in Westbrook's operations, specifically evidence that investment funds have been used for personal expenses and to bribe local officials for expedited permits. We leaked this to financial journalists, Sophia directed, not as a direct accusation, but as documented concerns that merit investigation. Second, they arranged for 3 former colleagues of Nolan's to give interviews refuting Vanessa's characterization of him as controlling or possessive. His ex-wife, Ashley, also volunteered a statement describing their amicable co-parenting relationship over 2 decades. The contrast between how you handled your first divorce and how Vanessa is handling this one will speak volumes, Mateo noted. Finally, and most crucially, they focused on Carmen's case. Diego's contacts in Chilean law enforcement discovered that the prosecutor driving the espionage charges had recently purchased a luxury condominium at a steep discount, a property developed by one of Westbrook's subsidiary companies. That's a clear conflict of interest, Mateo observed. Possibly criminal. Through carefully placed information, they ensured this connection reached both the prosecutor's superiors and select journalists. Within 48 hours, the prosecutor recused himself from Carmen's case, citing personal reasons. His replacement, a no-nonsense woman with a reputation for integrity, reviewed the evidence and promptly reduced the charges to a minor confidentiality violation. Carmen was released with a fine and probation. The morning after Carmen's release, Nolan received another text from Trey Westbrook. You think you've won something? This is just beginning. Some advice. Check your immigration status before getting too comfortable in Chile. Nolan showed the message to Mateo, who immediately contacted the Chilean immigration office. Sure enough, someone had filed a complaint questioning Nolan's visa status, triggering a review. They're trying to get you deported, Mateo explained. Fortunately, I've already filed for an extended residency permit based on your environmental consulting work. The harassment continued on multiple fronts. Nolan's blog was hit with denial of service attacks. His Minnesota teaching credentials were suddenly under review based on an anonymous complaint. Most disturbingly, Brooke reported being followed by someone taking photos of her in California. They're escalating, Diego observed during an emergency strategy session, which means we're hurting them. Sophia nodded, pulling up financial reports on her tablet. Westbrook Innovations has lost nearly 40% of its committed investment capital. Their Chilean projects are effectively on hold pending multiple investigations. And Theodore Aldridge's lobbying firm is hemorrhaging clients, Mateo added. 3 major accounts terminated last week alone. Nolan absorbed this information with mixed emotions. The strategic part of him recognized these as victories, but the human cost was mounting. Carmen's arrest, Brooks' harassment, the widening circle of people affected by this conflict. We need to end this, he decided. Not by backing down, but by finishing it decisively. Diego leaned forward. What do you have in mind? So far, we've been reactive, countering their moves, defending against their attacks. It's time to take control of the narrative completely. Nolan's voice hardened. I want to make them an offer they can't refuse. Over the next 3 days, they prepared what Diego called the nuclear option, a comprehensive legal and media strategy that would expose the full extent of Westbrook and Aldridge's questionable business practices, not just in Chile but globally. Sophia's team uncovered a pattern of environmental violations in Westbrook's previous developments, carefully concealed through shell companies and strategic donations. Theodore Aldridge's lobbying work included connections to industries with documented human rights abuses. Most damaging was evidence that Westbrook had misrepresented financial projections to investors, potentially constituting fraud. If we release all this, Mateo warned, there's no going back. You'll be making powerful enemies. I already have powerful enemies, Nolan replied. The difference is they don't know how powerful I've become. With everything in place, Nolan requested a meeting with all principal parties, Vanessa, Trey, Theodore, and Patricia. Surprisingly, they agreed, suggesting a private dining room at Santiago's most exclusive restaurant. It's almost certainly a trap, Diego cautioned. They'll have their full legal team present, trying to intimidate you. Good, Nolan replied. Let them bring everyone. It will save us time. On the evening of the meeting, Nolan arrived flanked by Diego, Mateo, and Sophia. As expected, Trey had assembled a formidable team of attorneys and financial advisors alongside Vanessa and her parents. Quite the entourage. Nolan, Theodore remarked condescendingly. Is this supposed to impress us? Not at all, Nolan replied pleasantly. I just wanted everyone relevant to be present for this discussion. Trey leaned forward, his handsome face set in hard lines. Let's cut to the chase. What will it take for you to end this vendetta and go back to Minneapolis where you belong? Nolan smiled. Interesting that you see it as a vendetta. I see it as accountability. He nodded to Sophia, who distributed tablets to everyone present. Before we discuss terms, I'd like you to review these documents. Take your time. For the next 15 minutes, silence reigned as Trey, Vanessa, and the Aldridges scrolled through meticulously documented evidence of their various transgressions, financial, legal, and ethical. Occasionally, one of their lawyers would inhale sharply or mutter under their breath. Theodore was the first to speak, his face ashen. What exactly are you implying with these allegations? I'm not implying anything, Nolan replied calmly. I'm stating facts. Facts that will be shared with relevant authorities and media outlets at 9 a.m. tomorrow, unless we reach an agreement tonight. Trey slammed his tablet down. This is blackmail. No, Mateo interjected smoothly. This is disclosure of information in the public interest. My client has a moral and potentially legal obligation to report suspected financial irregularities to proper authorities. Vanessa, who had remained silent until now, finally looked directly at Nolan. What do you want? The question echoed their cafe meeting weeks earlier, but this time the power dynamic had shifted completely. I want several things, Nolan replied. First, a fair and rapid divorce settlement, including my rightful share of our marital assets and full ownership of our Minneapolis home. Theodore started to object, but Trey silenced him with a gesture. Second, a complete cessation of all harassment against me, my daughter, Carmen Fuentes, and anyone else connected to me. Nolan continued. Third, Westbrook Innovations will divest from all Chilean development projects on environmentally sensitive land, selling those rights to a conservation trust that I have helped establish. Trey's face flushed with anger. That's our entire Chilean portfolio. Years of work and millions in investment. Consider it the cost of doing business unethically, Nolan replied without sympathy. And finally, Theodore Aldridge will resign from his lobbying firm, effective immediately, citing health concerns. The room erupted in protests and counterarguments. For nearly an hour, Trey and Theodore's legal team tried to negotiate better terms, but Nolan remained immovable. By midnight, faced with the alternative of complete professional ruin, they capitulated. As legal documents were drawn up and signed, Nolan found himself seated momentarily alone with Vanessa. "I never thought you had this in you," she said quietly. "This ruthlessness." "Neither did I," Nolan admitted. "But I never thought you capable of the cruelty you showed at Vina Hermosa either. I guess we both had hidden depths." Vanessa placed a protective hand over her belly. "What will you tell people back home? About us? About the baby?" "The truth," Nolan replied simply. "That our marriage ended because you chose someone else. The rest is between you and your conscience." After the last document was signed, Nolan stood to leave. Trey Westbrook stopped him at the door, his expression a mixture of hatred and reluctant respect. "You won," he acknowledged bitterly. "But ask yourself if it was worth it. What kind of man have you become to beat us at our own game?" Nolan considered the question seriously. "I became the man I needed to be to survive what you tried to do to me. The difference is I can walk away now. I doubt you'll ever stop looking over your shoulder, wondering what else I might know." As he left the restaurant with his team, Diego clapped him on the shoulder. "Masterfully done, my friend." They never saw it coming. Nolan nodded, feeling not triumph, but a complex mixture of satisfaction and weariness. "Is it really over?" "The battle is," Diego confirmed. "They'll honor the agreement because the alternative is mutual destruction. But the war? That changed you. That part is never really over." Later that night, alone in his Santiago apartment, Nolan called Brooke to share the news of their victory. After detailing the agreement, he fell silent, suddenly unsure of himself. "Dad? Are you still there?" Brooke asked. "I'm here," he replied. "I'm just processing." Westbrook asked if it was worth it, what I've become to win this fight. "And what did you tell him?" "That I became what I needed to be," Nolan said. "But now I'm wondering who I am on the other side of all this." Brooke was quiet for a moment. "I think you're still the same good man you've always been, Dad. You just learned you have teeth and claws when cornered. That's not a bad thing to know about yourself." As they said their goodnights, Nolan walked to his balcony overlooking Santiago's glittering nightscape. 6 weeks ago, he'd been a betrayed husband expelled from a luxury resort, stumbling away in shock and humiliation. Now, he stood victorious, having dismantled the plans of people who thought him too inconsequential to fear. But victory brought its own questions. What now? Who was Nolan Riviera beyond his revenge? As dawn broke over the Andes, he realized these were questions he was finally ready to answer. Chapter 7. After the storm. 3 months after the confrontation in Santiago, Nolan stood in the empty living room of his Minneapolis home, surrounded by moving boxes. The house felt different now. No longer the comfortable prison of his marriage to Vanessa, but not quite his own space either. Too many memories lingered in its corners. Brooke appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand. "Movers are all set for tomorrow. Are you sure about this, Dad? You love this house." "Loved," Nolan corrected gently. Past tense. It's time for something new. The divorce had been finalized with surprising speed once Vanessa understood the alternatives. As agreed, Nolan received the Minneapolis house, which he'd promptly listed for sale, along with a fair division of their other assets. Vanessa had retreated to Chicago with Trey, whose venture capital firm was struggling to rebuild after divesting its Chilean properties. Theodore Aldridge had indeed resigned from his lobbying firm, citing health concerns as scripted. Patricia had withdrawn from her various social commitments, and rumors suggested they were considering relocating from Santiago to Arizona. The swift and total victory should have felt more satisfying than it did. Instead, Nolan found himself grappling with an unexpected emptiness. The focused intensity of his revenge campaign had given him purpose during the darkest period of his life. Without it, he felt adrift. "Have you decided what you're doing after the move?" Brooke asked, interrupting his thoughts. Nolan gestured to his laptop on a packing crate. "Diego and I have been talking about expanding the authentic chili into something bigger. There's significant interest from environmental groups and sustainable tourism operators. So you're going back to Santiago? For a while, at least, Nolan confirmed. I've taken a sabbatical from teaching next year. After that, we'll see. The doorbell rang, an unexpected sound in the half-empty house. Brooke went to answer it, returning moments later with a surprised expression. Dad, there's someone here to see you. A Carmen Fuentes. Nolan's eyebrows shot up. Carmen? Here. He hurried to the front door, where Carmen stood awkwardly on his porch, looking very different from the poised hotel receptionist he'd first met. She wore casual clothes, her hair loose around her shoulders. Carmen, what are you doing in Minneapolis? She smiled hesitantly. I hope it's not an intrusion. I'm in the U.S. for a conference. I've been hired by a hotel management company as a security consultant, if you can believe it. Your friend Diego recommended me. That's wonderful, Nolan said warmly, inviting her inside. But how did you find me? Diego gave me your address, she admitted. I wanted to thank you in person for everything you did. Without your help, I might still be facing those ridiculous charges. They sat in the kitchen, the only room still fully furnished, sharing coffee and catching up. Carmen's new job would take her to hotel properties across Latin America, teaching staff to recognize and report suspicious activities without violating guest privacy. It's a strange new direction, she said with a self-deprecating laugh. From checking in guests to checking for corporate espionage. Life takes unexpected turns, Nolan agreed, thinking of his own dramatic transformation. As Carmen prepared to leave, she hesitated at the door. I read that your ex-wife had her baby last month. Nolan nodded. The birth announcement had appeared in the Minneapolis paper, a boy named Alexander Theodore Westbrook. Another Theodore to carry on the family legacy. Are you okay with everything? Carmen asked carefully. Nolan considered the question seriously. I'm getting there. The betrayal still stings sometimes, but the revenge, that's finished. I don't want to carry that weight anymore. After Carmen left, promising to stay in touch, Brooke found Nolan staring thoughtfully out the kitchen window. She seems nice, Brooke observed casually. She is, Nolan agreed, missing his daughter's speculative tone. So, Brooke continued, this sustainable tourism venture with Diego, is it just business, or is it something you're actually passionate about? Nolan turned to face her. What do you mean? I mean, Dad, that you spent your whole career teaching because you loved it. You were born to be an educator. Is this new project something that ignites that same spark, or is it just what came next after Vanessa? The question hit uncomfortably close to home. Was he pursuing this new direction out of genuine interest, or was it simply the path of least resistance after his life had been upended? I don't know, he admitted. The environmental work feels meaningful, and I'm good at building relationships with local communities. But you're right, teaching has always been my calling. Brooke squeezed his shoulder. Maybe you don't have to choose. The best teachers find new classrooms when the old ones don't fit anymore. The next day, as the movers loaded the last of his belongings, Nolan stood in the empty house, saying a final goodbye. So much of his life had been invested in these walls. 12 years of a marriage that had ultimately been built on shifting sand. His phone buzzed with a message from Diego. Exciting news. The United Nations Environmental Program wants to partner with us on sustainable tourism education. Call me, Nolan smiled, feeling a familiar surge of enthusiasm. Perhaps Brooke was right. Perhaps he didn't have to abandon his identity as an educator to embrace this new chapter. As he locked the door for the last time, he noticed his former next-door neighbor Martha watching from her porch. So it's true, she called. You're really leaving. Nolan walked over to say goodbye to the elderly widow who had been a constant presence during his years in the neighborhood. Time for a change, he explained. I'm heading to Chile for a while. Martha nodded sagely. I heard about everything. Terrible business with Vanessa. Though I can't say I'm entirely surprised. You're not. Nolan was taken aback. Oh, honey, Martha patted his arm. She was always looking over your shoulder for something better to come along. Some people are just built that way, never satisfied with what they have. As Nolan drove away, Martha's words echoed in his mind. Had he been blind to Vanessa's true nature all along, or had she changed during their marriage? Perhaps it didn't matter anymore. The past was firmly behind him now. 2 weeks later, Nolan was back in Santiago, working from a new office in Diego's building. The Authentic Chile had evolved into a thriving platform connecting environmentally conscious travelers with sustainable tourism options throughout Latin America. A book deal was in the works, and universities in 3 countries had inquired about guest lecture series. Carmen had become a regular collaborator, her hospitality expertise complementing Nolan's educational background and Diego's security knowledge. Their working relationship had gradually evolved into friendship, with occasional hints of something more that neither was quite ready to acknowledge. On a warm afternoon in February, Nolan received an unexpected email from Brooke with the subject line, "You should see this." Attached was a link to an article in a Chicago business publication featuring Trey Westbrook's latest venture, a chain of upscale hostels targeted at eco-conscious millennials. The concept was suspiciously similar to ideas Nolan had outlined in the Authentic Chile, right down to the sustainability education programs offered to guests. "He's copying your model," Brooke wrote. "Should we be concerned?" Nolan considered the question carefully. 6 months ago, he would have been furious, seeing this as yet another theft by the man who had stolen his wife. Now he felt something closer to bemusement. "Let him," he wrote back. "Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Besides, if he's actually implementing sustainable practices, that's ultimately good for the places and people we care about." Brooke's response came quickly. "Who are you, and what have you done with my vengeful father?" Nolan laughed aloud, surprising himself. The sound echoed in his office, genuine, unburdened laughter that felt like release. Later that evening, over dinner with Diego and Carmen, Nolan shared the article about Trey's new business. "The audacity," Diego exclaimed. "After everything, he steals your ideas?" Carmen studied Nolan's face. "You don't seem angry." "I'm not, surprisingly," Nolan admitted. "I realized something today. If Vanessa hadn't betrayed me, if they hadn't humiliated me at that resort, I would never have discovered this new path. I'd still be teaching high school Spanish in Minneapolis, married to a woman who didn't really want me." He raised his glass of Chilean wine. "So here's to unintended consequences and to the strange gift of being discarded." Diego shook his head in amazement. "You've changed, my friend." "For the better, I hope," Nolan replied. Carmen's smile was warm. "Definitely for the better. You've found your equilibrium." As they continued their meal, discussing upcoming projects and possibilities, Nolan felt a sense of peace that had eluded him since his world imploded at Vina Hermosa. The revenge that had consumed him had ultimately led to something more valuable: redemption, not just from Vanessa's betrayal, but from the limitations of the life he'd been living. The translator who had been callously dismissed had found his own authentic voice at last. Chapter 8. Reclamation. 1 year to the day after the humiliation at Vina Hermosa Resort, Nolan stood on the same property under very different circumstances. The luxury resort had changed hands, purchased by a coalition of environmental organizations and sustainable tourism operators, with Nolan serving as chief educational consultant. "Quite the homecoming," Diego remarked as they surveyed the vineyard from the main terrace. "Full circle, wouldn't you say?" Nolan nodded, taking in the scene. Where once exclusive villas had been planned, now stood a research center dedicated to sustainable agriculture and ecotourism. The main resort still operated as a luxury destination, but with a transformed mission focusing on environmental education alongside indulgence. "Hard to believe this all started with me being kicked out of this very spot," Nolan replied. Their visit coincided with the launch of a new educational program Nolan had developed. A 2-week immersive experience for tourism professionals focusing on cultural preservation and environmental sustainability. The inaugural class included participants from 12 countries, many drawn by Nolan's now considerable reputation in the field. Carmen approached, clipboard in hand, looking polished and confident in her role as security director for the property. "The Minister of Tourism just arrived. He's asking for you specifically, Nolan." As Nolan moved to greet the dignitary, he reflected on how dramatically his life had transformed. The Authentic Chile had expanded into a multi-platform educational enterprise with books, online courses, and consulting services. He divided his time between Santiago and Minneapolis, where he'd purchased a modest but charming house near a lake. Most surprisingly, he'd returned to teaching, not Spanish this time, but university courses on sustainable tourism and cultural preservation. His unique blend of academic knowledge and real-world experience made him a sought-after lecturer at institutions across the Americas. The launch event progressed smoothly, with Nolan delivering a keynote address that subtly incorporated lessons from his personal journey without revealing the full dramatic story. Only those closest to him knew how his professional reinvention had emerged from personal betrayal. That evening, as participants enjoyed a reception showcasing local wines and cuisine, Nolan slipped away for a moment of solitude. He found himself drawn to the exact spot where, a year earlier, he had set down Vanessa's luggage and walked away. "Poetic justice, isn't it?" came a voice behind him. Nolan turned to find Carmen watching him with understanding eyes. Over the past year, their professional collaboration had gradually evolved into a cautious romance. Two people wounded by life's unexpected turns finding comfort in shared values and mutual respect. "I was just thinking about how different things look from this vantage point now," Nolan admitted. Carmen nodded, taking his hand. "You transformed something painful into something meaningful. Not many people manage that." They rejoined a reception where Diego was regaling a group of Brazilian tourism officials with stories from their early projects. Nolan's phone buzzed with a message from Brooke, a photo of her latest photography exhibition in San Francisco, featuring landscapes from their travels together throughout Chile. "Wish you were here, Dad," she'd written, "but so proud of what you're launching today." As the evening wound down, Minister Valdivia raised a toast to the new venture. "To the authentic Chile Institute," he proclaimed, proving that responsible tourism can coexist with luxury experiences. Applause rippled through the crowd. Nolan accepted congratulations graciously, but found his attention drawn to a commotion near the entrance. A staff member was speaking urgently to Carmen, who quickly made her way to Nolan's side. "We have an unexpected situation," she murmured. "Trey Westbrook is here. He's asking to speak with you." Nolan's eyebrows shot up. "Trey? Here. Should I have security escort him out?" Carmen asked, her protective instincts evident. Nolan considered for a moment, then shook his head. "No, I'll speak with him. But not here, somewhere private." Minutes later, Nolan entered a small meeting room to find Trey Westbrook standing by the window, looking out at the illuminated vineyards. He turned at Nolan's entrance, and Nolan was struck by how different he appeared from their last encounter. The smug confidence was gone, replaced by something more subdued, almost chastened. "Thank you for seeing me," Trey said. "I wouldn't have blamed you for having me thrown out." "What are you doing here, Trey?" Nolan asked directly. Trey gestured vaguely toward the reception. "I heard about the launch. Your institute is making waves in the industry. That doesn't explain why you're in Chile at this specific event." Trey sighed, suddenly looking weary. "I'm here because I need to acknowledge something. What we did to you, what I participated in, was inexcusable. Not just unethical, but cruel." Nolan studied him skeptically. "A year later, you've developed a conscience?" "More like perspective," Trey replied. "Things haven't gone as planned since Chile." Over the next few minutes, Trey outlined the aftermath of their confrontation. His eco-hostile venture had struggled without the Chilean properties as flagships. Investors, wary after the previous controversy, had been hesitant to commit fully. Theodore Aldridge, bitter about his forced retirement, had withdrawn his remaining investment and influence. "And Vanessa?" Nolan asked, surprising himself with how little emotion the question provoked. Trey's expression tightened. "That's complicated. She's not the woman I thought she was." "Few people are," Nolan observed neutrally. "Our son is 7 months old now," Trey continued. "Alexander. He's the one good thing to come out of all this." Nolan nodded, feeling a distant sadness for the child born into such complicated circumstances. "I wish him well. He's innocent in all this." An awkward silence fell between them until Trey finally came to his point. "I'm here because I want to propose a collaboration. My hostels are struggling with exactly the challenges your institute addresses. I thought perhaps You want my help? Nolan interrupted incredulously. After everything, Trey had the grace to look embarrassed. Not charity, a business arrangement. Your expertise for my network of properties. Nolan leaned against the conference table, momentarily speechless at the man's audacity. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed, a genuine, unrestrained laugh that seemed to startle Trey. You really are something, Nolan said when he recovered. The man who thanked me for my service before taking my place now wants to hire my services. Trey's face flushed. I understand why that sounds absurd. It doesn't just sound absurd. It is absurd, Nolan cut in. But here's what's even more absurd. I'll consider it. You will. Trey couldn't hide his surprise. Not for your sake, Nolan clarified. For the sake of the local communities your properties impact. Send a proper proposal to my office. If it aligns with our mission, we'll evaluate it like any other potential project. Trey nodded quickly, clearly not having expected even this much. Thank you. That's more than fair. As Trey turned to leave, Nolan stopped him with a question. Why did you really come here, Trey? The proposal could have been sent by email. Trey paused at the door, his back to Nolan. I wanted to see it for myself, he admitted quietly. The man who beat us at our own game. The teacher we all underestimated. After Trey departed, Diego and Carmen found Nolan still in the conference room, staring thoughtfully out the window. What did Westbrook want? Diego demanded, protective instincts flaring. Nolan recounted the strange conversation. He wants to hire us as consultants. Absolutely not, Carmen declared immediately. After what he did to you, to us. That was my first reaction too, Nolan acknowledged. But then I realized something. Working with his properties means influencing how they operate, ensuring they actually implement sustainable practices rather than just greenwashing their marketing. Diego studied his friend carefully. This isn't about forgiveness, is it? No, Nolan admitted. It's about impact, about being true to our mission even when it's uncomfortable. Later that night, as they walked among the moonlit vines, Carmen slipped her arm through Nolan's. You surprised me today, she said softly. With Trey. She nodded. A year ago, you would have thrown him out immediately. A year ago, I was still driven by the need for retribution, Nolan reflected. Now, I just want to build something meaningful, something that outlasts the pain that birthed it. Carmen stopped, turning to face him. You've reclaimed yourself, Nolan. That's what's most remarkable about all of this. Not the institute, not the book deal, not the consulting work. You, under the Chilean stars, surrounded by vines that had witnessed both his humiliation and his triumph. Nolan kissed her gently. We've all reclaimed something, he murmured. You found a new career after being unjustly arrested. Diego reconnected with his passion for environmental protection. And Brooke discovered landscapes that changed her artistic vision, Carmen added. Nolan nodded. From something broken came something whole. Not the same, but perhaps better in its own way. The following morning, Nolan led the first workshop for the Institute's inaugural class. As he guided participants through exercises on cultural sensitivity and authentic local experiences, he caught sight of his reflection in the training room's glass wall. The man looking back at him bore little resemblance to the shell-shocked husband who had stumbled away from Vina Hermosa a year earlier. That man had been defined by what was done to him. This one was defined by what he had built from the ruins. During the lunch break, Nolan received an unexpected call from Martha, his former neighbor in Minneapolis. Just checking in on my favorite globe-trotting professor, she said cheerfully. The neighborhood's not the same without you popping over for coffee. I miss those chats too, Nolan replied warmly. How are you doing, Martha? Oh, the usual old lady business, she dismissed. But I thought you should know, Vanessa was here yesterday, driving slowly past your old house. Nolan frowned. Vanessa? Are you sure? These eyes are old, but they still work. Martha huffed. It was her all right, in some fancy SUV. She parked across the street for almost 10 minutes, just staring at the house. Seemed sad if you ask me. After ending the call, Nolan sat quietly, processing this information. Why would Vanessa visit their old home? Nostalgia? Regret? Or something else entirely? He was still pondering this when Carmen found him. Everything okay? You look troubled. Nolan shared Martha's news. It's probably nothing. Just strange timing with Trey showing up here yesterday. Carmen's security background immediately activated. That is an odd coincidence. Do you think they're planning something? I don't see what they could possibly do at this point, Nolan said. The divorce is final. The business arrangement settled. There's nothing left to fight over. But Carmen remained unconvinced. People who have lost something they valued, even if they were the ones who threw it away, sometimes try to reclaim it when they see it thriving without them. That evening, Nolan received an email from Vanessa, the first direct communication in months. Its brevity was startling. I was wrong. About everything. If you're ever willing to talk, I would appreciate the chance to apologize properly. V. Nolan stared at the message for a long time before sharing it with Diego and Carmen over dinner. It's a trap, Diego declared immediately. Or she's genuinely remorseful, Carmen suggested, more measured in her assessment. People do sometimes recognize their mistakes. What do you think? Nolan asked Brooke during their weekly video call that night. His daughter considered the question seriously. I think it doesn't actually matter if she's sincere or not. The real question is, do you need her apology for anything? The insight struck Nolan forcefully. Did he need Vanessa's apology? A year ago, he would have said yes desperately. Now, the answer was less clear. I don't think I do, he realized aloud. Whatever closure I needed, I've found it through other means. Brooke smiled approvingly. Then maybe just acknowledge her message, but don't engage further. You moved on, Dad. That's your victory. Nolan composed a brief, neutral response. Thank you for your message. I hope you and Alexander are well. I found peace with the past and wish the same for you. After sending it, he felt a sense of completion. The final page of a chapter turned, the book firmly closed. The remainder of the launch week passed in a blur of workshops, networking events, and media interviews. By the closing ceremony, the Institute had secured partnerships with universities on 3 continents and booking requests for workshops from tourism ministries in 5 countries. You've created something remarkable, Minister Valdivia told Nolan during the farewell reception. From personal adversity has come a public good. As guests departed and staff began cleanup, Nolan found himself once more on the terrace overlooking the valley. The symmetry was striking, standing in the same spot where his old life had ended, now firmly established in his new one. Diego joined him, clapping a hand on his shoulder. We should celebrate properly. This success is worth marking. Nolan smiled at his friend, the man who had helped him transform from victim to victor. We absolutely should. But first, I need to make one more reclamation. What's that? Diego asked curiously. Nolan gestured toward the resort entrance. I need to walk out of here on my own terms, not in shock and humiliation like last time, but in triumph and peace. Together with Carmen and Diego, Nolan walked through the Vina Hermosa lobby toward the main entrance. The same front desk where he had once been told 3 guests, not 4, now displayed brochures for the Authentic Chile Institute. At the doorway, Nolan paused, looking back at the space that had witnessed his greatest humiliation and now hosted his greatest professional achievement. Full circle, he murmured. Carmen squeezed his hand. Not a circle, a spiral. You've returned to the same point, but at a higher level. Outside, the Chilean sunset painted the vineyard in gold and amber. Nolan took a deep breath of the fragrant air, feeling not closure. He'd already found that, but a sense of rightness, of things falling into their proper places after a period of chaos. The translator who had been thanked for his service and dismissed had found a new language to speak, one of resilience, purpose, and authentic connection. And in that language, there was no word for defeat. Chapter 9, Legacy. 5 years after the fateful trip to Chile, Nolan Riviera stood at a podium in Stockholm, accepting the prestigious Global Tourism Stewardship Award for the Authentic Chile Institute's work in transforming travel industry practices across Latin America. This recognition belongs not just to our team, he told the audience of industry leaders and environmental advocates, but to the communities who have shared their knowledge, their homes, and their wisdom with travelers seeking authentic connections rather than manufactured experiences. In the front row, Carmen applauded proudly, her engagement ring catching the light. Beside her sat Diego, now the Institute's chief operating officer, and Brooke, whose photography of threatened environments had become integral to their advocacy work. The journey from betrayed husband to internationally recognized educator and advocate had been neither straight nor simple. There had been setbacks and challenges alongside the triumphs, moments of doubt interspersed with breakthroughs. The collaboration with Trey Westberg's hostels had eventually proceeded, though strictly on Nolan's terms. For 2 years, Institute consultants had worked to transform the properties into genuinely sustainable operations. The relationship remained purely professional, with Trey himself notably absent from direct interactions. Vanessa had embarked on her own reinvention, divorcing Trey after 3 years of increasingly public disagreements about business and parenting. She had relocated to New York, where she ran a modest but respected art gallery. Her lifestyle blog had transitioned to focus on single motherhood and personal renewal, themes Nolan observed with dispassionate interest from a distance. Theodore and Patricia Aldridge had indeed moved to Arizona, where Theodore's health had deteriorated significantly. Patricia occasionally reached out to Nolan through intermediaries, seeking some form of reconciliation that he neither encouraged nor explicitly rejected. The wounds had healed, but the scars remained. At the award ceremony's reception, Nolan found himself approached by a distinguished woman he recognized as the Swedish Minister of Sustainable Development. "Your institute's model is quite remarkable, Mr. Riviera," she observed. "Particularly how you've managed to make environmental education economically advantageous for tourism operators. We found that authentic experiences create more loyal customers," Nolan explained. "Travelers increasingly want connection, not just consumption." "And the personal journey that led you to this work?" she inquired. "I've heard there's quite a story there." Nolan smiled diplomatically. "Let's just say I learned firsthand the difference between being a tourist and being a translator of cultural values." Later that evening, in their hotel suite, Carmen found Nolan on the balcony overlooking Stockholm's picturesque waterfront. "You never tell the full story," she observed, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "About how this all started." "The beginning doesn't define the journey," Nolan replied. "And honestly, I've come to be grateful for what happened. Not the betrayal itself, but the freedom it ultimately gave me." Carmen rested her head against his shoulder. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if they hadn't chosen that particular form of cruelty? If they just divorced you normally back in Minneapolis?" "Sometimes," Nolan admitted, "I might still be teaching high school Spanish, living a smaller life. Not unhappy, but not fully alive either." The next morning brought news that Theodore Aldridge had passed away in Arizona. Patricia's message was brief but pointed. "He often spoke of regret regarding how things ended with you. If you could find it in your heart to attend the memorial service, it would mean a great deal." Nolan shared the news with Carmen and Diego over breakfast. "Will you go?" Diego asked. Nolan considered the question carefully. "Yes," he decided finally. "Not for Theodore's sake, but for my own. Some chapters need proper endings." 2 weeks later, Nolan found himself in a sun-drenched church in Scottsdale, sitting quietly at the back as Theodore's life was eulogized by former colleagues and friends. The accounts of his business acumen and strategic brilliance rang true, though they omitted the ruthlessness Nolan had experienced firsthand. Vanessa was there with Alexander, now a solemn 6-year-old with his mother's hazel eyes. Trey was notably absent, confirming rumors that the divorce had been acrimonious. Patricia sat stiffly in the front row, the perfect portrait of dignified grief. After the service, as attendees mingled at the reception, Nolan was preparing to leave when Patricia approached him. "You came," she said simply, her voice betraying genuine surprise. "It seemed right," Nolan replied. "Whatever happened between us, Theodore was part of my life for many years." Patricia nodded, visibly struggling with emotion. "He wasn't always the man you knew," she said finally. "The ambition consumed him gradually, changed him. By the end, I hardly recognized him myself." Before Nolan could respond, Vanessa appeared beside her mother, Alexander's hand clasped firmly in hers. She had aged subtly but distinctly, fine lines around her eyes speaking of stress, more than passing years. Nolan, she acknowledged, her voice carefully neutral. Thank you for coming. I'm sorry for your loss, he replied with equal neutrality. An awkward silence fell until Alexander looked up at Nolan curiously. Are you my dad's friend? The boy asked innocently. The question hung in the air, laden with unintended significance. Vanessa paled slightly, but Nolan crouched to the child's eye level with a gentle smile. No, I'm an old friend of your family, he explained simply. I knew your grandfather for many years. Alexander nodded, accepting this at face value, while Vanessa's expression reflected complicated relief. After a few more moments of stilted conversation, they moved on, leaving Nolan with Patricia. He's a beautiful child, Nolan observed. He is, Patricia agreed, and the only real legacy that matters now. Her words struck Nolan forcefully. Legacy. What truly remained after all the ambitions, schemes, and betrayals? Theodore's business achievements were already fading into corporate history. The luxury developments he and Trey had planned in Chile had largely been repurposed or abandoned. Even his marriage had evidently become something different from its public image by the end. As Nolan prepared to leave, Patricia touched his arm hesitantly. For what it's worth, I am truly sorry for how we treated you. There's no excuse, but perhaps some explanation. We were all caught in Theodore's vision, his certainty that he knew best for everyone. Nolan studied her face, seeing for the first time not the imperious mother-in-law who had dismissed him, but an aging woman coming to terms with her own complicity and regrets. I forgave you all long ago, he said truthfully. Not for your sake, but for mine. Carrying that burden served no purpose once I found my own path. Patricia's eyes filled with tears. You're a better person than any of us deserved. Not better, Nolan corrected gently. Just different, with different values and different measures of success. On the flight back to Santiago, where he and Carmen now made their primary home, Nolan reflected on the strange symmetry of life. 5 years earlier, he had flown to Chile as Vanessa's dutiful husband and convenient translator, only to be discarded when he'd served his purpose. Now he returned as his own man, having built a life and legacy entirely of his choosing. Carmen dozed beside him, her head resting comfortably on his shoulder. They had set their wedding day for the following spring, a small ceremony overlooking the same vineyard where his old life had ended and his new one had begun. The Institute had expanded beyond Chile to include programs throughout Latin America, with plans for further growth into Asia and Africa. Brooke had established a photography foundation documenting endangered cultural traditions, partially funded by Institute grants. Diego had married a brilliant Chilean environmental lawyer who now headed their legal advocacy division. From the broken pieces of betrayal, a mosaic of unexpected beauty had emerged, not just for Nolan, but for everyone who had chosen to join his journey. As the plane began its descent into Santiago, Nolan gazed out at the majestic Andes silhouetted against the setting sun. The mountains remained unchanged, indifferent to human dramas that unfolded in their shadow. There was comfort in their permanence, a reminder that even the most devastating storms eventually passed. His phone buzzed with a message from one of the Institute's indigenous partners in Peru. Nolan, the Sustainable Tourism Program in Cusco, has been approved. The community sends their deepest thanks for your advocacy. Such messages, evidence of real impact, of lives improved and cultures preserved, with a true measure of success, far more meaningful than the award now packed carefully in his carry-on bag. 6 months later, Nolan and Carmen stood among the vines of Vina Hermosa, now the Sustainable Viticulture Research Center, exchanging vows before an intimate gathering of friends and family. Brooke served as Nolan's best person, while Diego and his wife beamed from the front row. The ceremony incorporated both American and Chilean traditions, with Carmen's extended family providing music that echoed through the valley. As they moved to the reception in the former resort's redesigned central courtyard, Nolan was struck by the perfect circularity of the moment. Happy? Carmen asked, radiant in her simple but elegant dress. Beyond anything I could have imagined, Nolan replied truthfully. Diego raised his glass for a toast, his voice carrying across the assembled guests. To Nolan and Carmen, who remind us that sometimes what appears to be an ending is merely a different kind of beginning. Cheers erupted, glasses clinked, and music swelled as the celebration continued into the evening. When Nolan slipped away for a moment of quiet reflection, he found himself drawn to the exact spot where he had stood 5 years earlier, watching his life implode as Vanessa, Trey, and the Aldridges had dismissed him from their perfect plan. Standing there now, surrounded by the sweet scent of ripening grapes rather than the bitter taste of betrayal, Nolan felt no lingering anger, only a profound sense of gratitude for the path that humiliation had ultimately revealed. Brooke found him there, her camera hanging around her neck. Caught in a moment of philosophical reflection, "Dad," she teased gently. "Just appreciating the journey," he replied. 5 years ago in this exact spot, I thought my life was over. I couldn't imagine anything beyond the pain and humiliation. Brooke slipped her arm through his. "And now you're building something that will outlast all of us. A different kind of legacy than Theodore tried to build. One based on preservation rather than exploitation." Nolan nodded thoughtfully. Life rarely gives us what we expect. Sometimes it gives us what we need instead. As they rejoined the celebration, Nolan was surprised to see Carmen deep in conversation with a late-arriving guest, Vanessa. She stood uncertainly at the edge of the reception, elegant but clearly uncomfortable, clutching a small wrapped package. Nolan approached them, curiosity overcoming his initial surprise. "Vanessa, this is unexpected. I wasn't sure I should come," she admitted. "But when Carmen sent the invitation, I thought perhaps it was time to close this chapter properly." Carmen squeezed Nolan's hand reassuringly before discreetly excusing herself, leaving the former spouses facing each other amid the celebration of new beginnings. "Congratulations," Vanessa said, her composure slipping slightly. "You've built something remarkable here. Something real." "Thank you," Nolan replied simply. Vanessa extended the small package. "A wedding gift. Nothing extravagant, just meaningful, I hope." Nolan unwrapped it to find an antique compass, beautifully restored and mounted in a hand-carved wooden box. The inscription read, "Sometimes getting lost leads to the right destination." "It belonged to my grandfather," Vanessa explained. "He always said it was better to follow your own compass than someone else's map." "It's beautiful," Nolan acknowledged, genuinely touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Thank you." An awkward silence fell between them, years of unspoken words hanging in the air. Finally, Vanessa spoke, her voice barely audible above the celebration. "I was wrong, Nolan. Not just about how we ended things, but about who you were all along." Her eyes met his, clear and direct, for perhaps the first time in their relationship. "You were never the one who needed to change or improve. You were always enough. I just couldn't see it." Nolan absorbed her words, finding they no longer held the power to wound or heal him. "We all make choices based on who we are at the time. You chose what you thought would make you happy. And you?" she asked. "Are you happy now?" Nolan looked around at the life he had built from the ashes of betrayal. At Carmen laughing with Diego, at Brooke showing her photographs to a group of indigenous partners, at the research center that would help preserve Chile's environmental and cultural heritage for generations. "I am," he said, the simple truth requiring no elaboration. Vanessa nodded, a complex mix of emotions crossing her face. "I should go. Alexander is waiting with my sister. I just needed to see that something good came from all the damage we caused." As she turned to leave, Nolan called after her softly. "Vanessa." She paused, looking back. "I hope you find your compass too," he said sincerely. After she departed, Carmen rejoined him, slipping easily into his embrace. "Are you okay?" "More than okay," he assured her. That was the final piece falling into place. Not forgetting, but truly moving beyond. As evening deepened into night, the celebration continued under strings of twinkling lights. Nolan and Carmen danced among the vines, their shadows merging and separating in the gentle rhythm of new beginnings built on hard-won wisdom. Diego raised his glass one final time as the night drew to a close. To the translator, he announced, who taught us all how to interpret life's harshest lessons into its greatest opportunities. In the years that followed, the Authentic Chile Institute expanded its mission globally, becoming a leading voice in sustainable tourism and cultural preservation. Nolan and Carmen welcomed twins, a boy and girl named Elena and Mateo, who grew up between Santiago and Minneapolis, fluent in multiple languages and cultures. Brooks Photography Foundation documented indigenous practices across 5 continents, creating an invaluable archive of traditional knowledge. Diego's security firm evolved to specialize in protecting environmental activists and cultural heritage sites from exploitation. On the 10th anniversary of that fateful day at Vina Hermosa, Nolan published a memoir titled The Translator's Journey. Without sensationalism or bitterness, he recounted his transformation from discarded husband to educational pioneer, focusing not on the betrayal, but on the reclamation that followed. The book's final passage reflected the philosophy that had emerged from his darkest moment. In the end, we are all translators of our own experiences, interpreting pain into purpose, betrayal into wisdom, endings into beginnings. The true measure of our lives is not in how we are treated by others, but in how we transform that treatment into something meaningful. When they told me, "Your job's done," they could not have been more wrong. My most important work was just beginning. The man who had once been dismissed as merely a convenient translator had found his authentic voice at last, speaking not just for himself, but for all who sought to transform life's harshest moments into their greatest legacy. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.